My name is Dr. Stephen Hildebrand. I've been teaching here at Franciscan for 21 years in the Department of Theology. And almost from the beginning, the works of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, have had a profound effect upon my teaching, my own formation as a theologian, and upon our students. So I can offer one example of what an effect I think Pope Benedict has had upon our students, certainly upon me. He has a singular ability to unite both a fidelity to the Church, a fidelity to Christ, and then a really sharp and deep critical sense. He's, I think, above all, associated with reason, with rationality. He has beautiful reflections on this, and his understanding of reason is not narrow, but expansive. And really I think the singular characteristic, other theologians do this, but I think nobody does it as well as he does. He integrates a rational approach to the faith, to the scriptures, to tradition, to theological questions. He's deeply rational, but at the same time profoundly faithful. And he's able to secure and preserve and protect the faith of the Church and to pass it on and to make it stronger through his rational reflection upon it. Another really fantastic contribution of Pope Benedict, where I think he's really sound, is his ability to integrate the study of history with the faith. He has wonderful reflections upon historical study as it applies to scriptures, to the study of the scriptures, and our ability to preserve the truth of the scriptures and yet be true to its historical setting. Really a wonderful historical sensitivity on his part. It's a funny example that occurs to me with Pope Benedict on just these kinds of questions. In his book called Communion, he mentions the form criticism of the Gospels. Now, form criticism, you have to know, is of all the criticisms of the New Testament, form criticism is the one that tends to undermine its historical value and sort of makes certainly traditionally minded people very nervous when it comes to the approach to the scriptures. But what Pope Benedict does is take form criticism, this is in his book called Communion, he takes form criticism and turns it into an argument for the tradition, actually an argument for Petrine primacy. So the way that goes very briefly is that form criticism has this point that the evangelists are going to preserve only those traditions that make sense to their community at the time that they're writing. So let's say, for example, St. John's Gospels being written, most people think toward the end of the first century. Ratzinger makes the point, he takes that dating, he said, okay, let's work with that. John's Gospel's written toward the end of the first century. And then he takes the form critical insight that the evangelist only writes about those things that are relevant to his community at the time. And then Ratzinger draws the inference, well, it's obvious that John is writing all about St. Peter and the role of St. Peter, so it must mean that Petrine primacy didn't die with Peter. It didn't die with Peter in the year 64. That John is concerned about Petrine primacy when he's composing his gospel later in the first century, after the death of Peter. So it's an ingenious argument, I think typical of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, an ingenious argument for using a very unconventional means for a kind of traditional position. So Ratzinger's thought has in various ways permeated our program and influenced our faculty and students. But on a more personal note, this all came home to me when we were given the honor of hosting the annual Ratzinger Conference. So every year, the Ratzinger Foundation in Rome puts on a conference in collaboration with usually a university throughout the world, and they alternate. They're in Rome one year and then some city in the world the next year. So it's a great honor for us to be chosen as partners with the Ratzinger Foundation to host a Ratzinger conference, the first one in the United States, and also significantly the first one devoted to the thought of Pope Benedict himself. And so with the foundation, we decided that it would be really wonderful to honor Pope Benedict, to do something beautiful for him, and to acknowledge the great value of his thought, in particular his thought on the church. So it was really, really wonderful time to honor Pope Benedict. And I thought the conference really, in a way, reflected Pope Benedict's own concerns, in a way reflected his life's work. So for example, the conference was grounded in the liturgy. We prayed in Holy Mass before the conference, before the days of the conference. And then again, we prayed at the end of the day of intellectual discussion and presentations and so on. So just as Ratzinger's thought begins and ends in faith, begins and ends in prayer and liturgy, so our conference, honoring his thought, did the same, imitated him, you might say, in that respect. It was deeply moving for me to be part of the conference, to honor Pope Benedict in this way, and just the cherry on top of our Sunday, so to speak, was when Pope Benedict wrote a letter that we were able to read at the conference. So to have his own personal acknowledgement of our desire to learn from him, to honor him, to have his own, in a way, his own contribution to our conference was just a singular blessing and a wonderful honor. I've been thinking a lot, of course, as we all have, about Pope Benedict since his death. And, of course, experienced some sadness over this, as is only appropriate. But the thought keeps coming back to me that, of course, I never met Ratzinger Pope Benedict, but the thought keeps coming to me that now that he's died, I can have, in a way, a closer relationship to him now than I had when he was alive. But now that he's died, he can know me. He can know more intimately how he's influenced us. He can know how the great effect he's had upon us, how his thought has affected our students and changed their lives. And perhaps even more than knowledge that he can now have of us, he can help us. One of the beautiful truths of our faith is the intimacy that we gain when those we love die, especially in the case of somebody like Pope Benedict. It's impossible for people like me to have any kind of intimacy with him before he died. But now we can have a kind of intimacy in the Lord, made possible by the communion of saints and our ability to pray for him and for him to know that we're praying for him in a way that he couldn't have known before, and for him to pray for us and to help us to continue the project that he helped us with his writings and his person and his guidance when he was here with us.